Hello, and welcome to our online discussion of euthanasia, disability, and other issues related to people with disabilities and ending of life. My name is Amy Hasbrook, and this is our discussion for January 30th, 2015. Welcome to our discussion to you all, and Christian Debray, who is the Director Adjoint, and we also have Kevin Fitzpatrick with us, and we'll be doing an interview a little later with Kevin. Christian, arrête de jouer.
On peut voir aussi.
Wait. Okay. Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet is a project of the Council of Canadians with Disabilities, and our goal is to unify, inform, and give voice to the disability rights opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending-of-life practices that have a discriminatory impact on people with disabilities. There are four basic ways to look at our position opposing the legalization of assisted suicide. First is that it's unnecessary because everyone already has the option to commit suicide or to refuse medical care and have palliative sedation on demand. Secondly, it's discriminatory because while people without disabilities receive suicide prevention services if they express a wish to die, people with disabilities will be encouraged and assisted to kill themselves. Thirdly, the issue of choice that so many people who are proponents of assisted suicide talk about. The fact is the choice to die cannot be free as long as people with disabilities don't have the choice in where and how to live. And finally, in the places where assisted suicide is legal, the safeguards do not prevent people with disabilities from being wrongly killed. The goal of our online discussion is to give folks with disabilities an opportunity to talk among ourselves about this issue. Generally, the debate is described as being between progressive liberals on one side and religious conservatives on the other. And that certainly doesn't represent all of people with disabilities, and it doesn't represent the disability perspective on these issues. Because our perspective reflects a very progressive analysis of public policy, and discrimination, and that is not reflected right now in the public debate. And we also speak about these issues from our direct experience as consumers of health services, and we know what can go wrong in the healthcare system when people don't get their needs met. So this is an opportunity for those of us with disabilities to talk among ourselves, to learn from each other, and to be able to build strategy and have a good and open discussion. There are several ways to participate. You can use Google Hangouts on Air if you go to Hangouts, and you'll be able to find our discussion. You can also go to my my YouTube page, or do just a Google search on euthanasia and disability, and you'll click on the videos and you'll find all our videos back through September of 2013. And you can submit questions either through the YouTube link or through the Google Hangouts on Air, or if you want an invitation, you can just request an invitation. You can join us direct on video. For more information on the subjects that we talk about, you can reach us in a lot of different ways. First, you can go to our Facebook page, which is at facebook.com/Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet. It's all written out. You can also follow me on Twitter, which is @TVNDY. You can email me at info@tv-ndy.ca, or you can go to our website, which is tvndy.ca. Okay, so our topics for today, we have an interview with Kevin Fitzpatrick, and we have some news briefs. So we'll get started with the interview, with the introduction anyway. Kevin Fitzpatrick has an Order of the British Empire and is the director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition International, and he has a PhD in philosophy. He has 40 years of direct experience of disability and the issues affecting people with disabilities, or disabled people, I should say. Along with Not Dead Yet UK, he's a leader of the resistance to the Falconer bill, which would allow euthanasia and assisted suicide in England. He worked with the UK and Welsh governments on developing national adoption service plans. He's also a member of the board of the Welsh Ambulance Services Trust, a board member of Consumer Focus Wales, and director of Inclusion 21 Limited. Kevin is a former professor at Swansea University. He led a research team at Cardiff University and is an associate of the Welsh Institute of Health and Social Care at the University of Glamorgan. He was the first Disability Rights Commissioner for Wales, serving from 2000 to 2007, and was awarded the Order of the British Empire for services to disabled people in Wales in 2011. He lives somewhere between France, Wales, and Ireland, but he is a consistent and enthusiastic supporter of Manchester United. Welcome, Kevin Fitzpatrick.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, Kevin, can you tell us, now that I've given a 10-minute introduction, can you tell us a little more about yourself, your activities and affiliations?
Sure. I'm an Irishman by birth. From Belfast, from Northern Ireland, and a victim of what's generally euphemistically described as a sectarian assassination attempt during the Civil War at the age of 17, which left me a wheelchair user, paraplegic. So for more than 40 years now I've been disabled, and now at this current moment in time my primary role is with the coalition, the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition International, and I'm also a spokesperson for Not Dead Yet UK. In my professional life, as you've already described, I did a PhD in philosophy and taught at the University in Swansea for a number of years before I then worked for a large charitable institution, a charitable association, where the purpose was to help disabled people into employment. And as you've also said, I was in fact the only Disability Rights Commissioner for Wales in Great Britain, simply because the government at the time decided to scrap that commission in 2007 in favour of bringing all of the equalities agenda together under one roof. So they've got a general Human Rights Commission now. I think it's a bit of a shame that they did that, but that's the way it was.
Yeah, yeah. How did you come to have your views on assisted suicide and euthanasia? How did you come into this movement?
Well, it was actually very simple because I was requested. Another commissioner at the time was Jane Campbell, who subsequently went into the House of Lords and is now Baroness Jane Campbell. And back in 2002, when the first attempt was made to bring legislation through the House of Lords in Britain, she set up a loose coalition, an organisation which is basically bringing disabled people together who oppose the idea of having a law permitting third-party intervention and assisted suicide in Britain. We're now on, I think, what it is, the Falconer Bill is the 6th attempt in that period to try to pass a law on assisted suicide in Britain. And in 2010, Jane was very wrapped up in work in the House of Lords, particularly around social care. And she was finding it more and more difficult and burdensome to carry the work that Not Dead Yet UK presented her with. And she asked me to get involved. Mm-hmm. That's what I did.
Great.
So I do research, I write, and I speak on behalf of Not Dead Yet UK when the opportunity presents itself for the media or for whoever asks me. And latterly, as I've just said, I joined EPC International in September last year.
Okay. There have been a lot of austerity measures that have been brought in by the Cameron government since 2009, the work capacity assessments, the bedroom tax, and the dismantling the independent living fund. Could you talk about some of those and how they've kind of led to the assisted suicide bill?
Yeah, I think we're in a period that's absolutely crazy at the minute because, in fact, the austerity measures that the Cameron government has introduced make significant attacks on disabled people and vulnerable people in particular. And we are getting stories now, we have been getting stories for quite a while now, a couple of years, about disabled people who are losing their independence, losing their livelihoods, their jobs, their cars, their homes even, to the extent that they're just falling into despair and committing suicide. We're in a situation that takes us back 50 years at least, where disabled people are faced with the choice of living in an institution, a hospital or a retirement home, or in an inappropriate setting away from their families and without their independence, without their own homes. So we're really going backwards in that regard. And these austerity measures, as I said, which do attack disabled people, for example, their benefits, the income that they depend on for their independence, and they have just decided, this government, to close what's known as the Independent Living Fund, which was set up to enable people with more complex needs to be able to function and live at home with the support of other people and equipment. And that Independent Living Fund is now ceased. It's going to be removed. And those people who depended on it for their independence and to be able to live independently in their own homes are now going to have it removed from them. So they will be faced, as I said, with this terrible choice of living in dependent accommodation and certainly not at home independently.
Yeah.
Here, our government do some measure resembling of what you suffer in UK.
Yeah, and what's bizarre is that independent living services cost less than keeping people in institutions, and it's really bizarre that they're.
It is bizarre. You know, there's a discussion at the minute because we also have, as around the world, we have this problem of an aging population, and there's a discussion current at the moment that older people should be allowed to die at home and not in hospital. So there is a discussion about how to make that happen, and people are actually recognizing that it is less expensive, more desirable for people to die in their own homes, with comforts that their homes and their families can bring them, rather than in hospital. But at the same time, they're pushing disabled people into institutions and saying, well, look, you know, we can't afford to keep you at home. And the anomaly in that, of course, is that, as we know, and you quite rightly said at the beginning, that this is a matter clearly of discrimination against disabled people, that those disabled people are not getting the same reaction as non-disabled people, and are being forced into a situation where they will go into institutions or die. We also have, as you know, in Britain, this, well, I suppose it's fairly unusual around the world, where we have a national health service, which is free at the point of delivery, which means that anyone can access healthcare services for free. But you know, in that context, the health service is more and more declared to be broken. The system is just under so much pressure, and of course, in that situation, you get a lot of doctors and nurses who are more and more submerged by what's coming through the doors at them, and you know, it's just too easy in those circumstances to think, well, a lethal injection costs $20, whereas it costs tens of thousands of pounds maybe to keep someone at home. And they make a rather simple calculation, foolishly in my view, and rather coldly, and say, well, it's easier for people to die than it is to keep them alive.
Right, right. And the thing that appalls me is that rather than looking at the systematic problems that cause the lack of funds, why are we spending exorbitant amounts to buy medical equipment, whereas really these things are so radically overpriced? Rather than looking at that problem, they're simply saying, well, just cut the services, and it ends up falling on the heads of poor and vulnerable people, rather than being more sensible about the way they are attacking the problem. It's very frustrating.
It's incredibly frustrating because I have loads of examples. Let me just give you one. This arises because in Britain, the healthcare budget is separate from the social care budget.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something we've been talking about for all of my time since before I joined the Commission back in 2000. So for 15 years, we've been saying that the two should be married together. Here's a simple example. We have an example of a social care body, a part of the social care organisation, spending £30,000 to fit a kitchen for a wheelchair user, so that the kitchen, everything would rise and fall. All the cupboards would go up and down, the sink would go up and down, and so on. But in fact, it costs somewhere between £400 and £800, depending on the wheelchair, to put what's an electric riser, which allows the individual in the wheelchair to go into a standing position. Now, that standing position is actually much better for health. You get a lot of health gains out of being able to stand if you're not able to stand regularly. To be able to stand to access cupboards which are high above you is far more beneficial than having the cupboard come down to you. Yet, here we had the difference between £800 and £30,000. It's just a waste of money because people just don't talk to each other properly.
Right, right. Can you talk about the origin and progress of the Falconer bill, and how NDY UK has responded to that?
Yes, indeed. The Falconer bill is now at the report stage. This is the furthest that any of these bills have progressed through the House of Lords. Where we are at this moment in time is we understand that because there's a general election coming up in May, there isn't time for this bill to go through to be enacted in this Parliament. That means it will die. That doesn't give us great comfort because it will come back again. And the talk now is that it will come back not through the House of Lords because it's been frustrated there 6 times. The talk now is that it will actually come into the House of Commons, which is the lawmaking body, if you will. The House of Lords generally ratifies what the House of Commons does. If that's the case, it will be a different tack for us and perhaps more dangerous. But we'll start work on that after the election when we see who wins, which party wins, and so on. But the Falconer bill is actually, it's incredible. It's very, very thin by comparison even with the original bill that was brought by Lord Joffrey in 2002. They keep on talking about it being an assisted dying bill, but the truth is that even Falconer's own, he set up something that he called a commission to look into assisted suicide, and his own commission report was populated with people who actually agreed with the change in the law anyway, but his own commission report states clearly that assisted dying is shorthand. He calls it a compendium term for assisted suicide and voluntary euthanasia. When we talk about this bill as being an assisted dying bill, it is actually an assisted suicide bill, and it will lead to euthanasia for sure. What we've been doing is we've been getting mobilizing disabled people, and amazing response from disabled people who have no resources, as you know. And we've had protests. We had a protest outside the House of Lords on the 18th of July during the second reading of the bill, which is actually the first effective, important stage. And we organised another in January on the 16th of January to again protest during the report stage. It's quite funny actually because during the summer in the nice sunshine, we had a huge crowd of our opponents beside us shouting and waving placards.
Mm-hmm.
This time in January, we were the only ones who turned up. We were disabled people showing how robust we really are, getting out in the middle of the winter and doing our protest. But I think it's really important that we understand Not Dead Yet UK is actually able to mobilise that kind of response despite the circumstances of individual disabled people who we've got no resources to help them to come to London, because it just shows the strength of feeling that we now have together against what's coming and the dangers we see in such legislation.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about EPC International and some of EPCI's work?
Sure.
Yeah.
EPC International has been going for some years. I just joined in September. It's an organisation that I worked with over the last few years, particularly in the year leading up to the end of May last year. Part of what I did then was I was tasked to set up, and I did begin an association across Europe where we had allies already made, and set up an organisation called EPC Europe and handed that on. Unfortunately, that's not gone anywhere since I left, but because of that, and partly because of other matters, it seemed just sensible for me when I was invited to. I joined EPC International. Now, that's an international organisation with contacts across the world because, let's face it, this is a global debate and we need global resistance. So my part in that is to continue to research and to write, as I do for Not Dead Yet UK, and to present myself when opportunities arise or I'm invited to speak to media on this subject. And so it's an organisation with a single focus. Its simple focus is to combat laws which permit third-party interventions, usually doctors, where people can help people to die under all those circumstances we know where abuse can happen. And I simply transfer, if you will, what I can do across there, trying to make sure that I'm up to date with what's happening as far as I can across Europe and the rest of the world, and try to respond to the latest nonsense that comes out of the pro-euthanasia lobby. One
thing that we are dealing with here in Canada is there's an MP who's a quad, high-level quad. Yeah. He's sponsoring a bill to allow assisted dying, and his bill makes no bones about it being directed at people with disabilities and has no requirement that the person be at the quote-unquote end of life. Essentially, the bill is for himself when he was newly injured and when he might want to use it. And we found that here in Canada, anyway, it's many people are lured and seduced by the idea that this is a choice, that, you know, assisted suicide is a choice and they want to have choice. How do you respond to that?
Well, the simple truth is that every law that I've ever seen, including this one proposed in Britain by Falconer, takes choice away from individuals. What it does is it puts that choice squarely into the hands of doctors in this case, when the law demands that doctors will do the act. And it's very simple to see, because if you imagine going to your doctor and saying, I want to commit suicide, and your doctor says, yes, I'll help you, then it looks as though you have some choice. Mm-hmm. But when the doctor says, no, I'm not going to help you, then you don't have a choice. So the idea that you have a choice here is an illusion. And in fact, what that leads to in places like Holland and Belgium is what's called doctor shopping. Mm-hmm. And now, for example, in Britain, 77% of all general practitioners say they want no change in the law. They don't want to become killers. And so what people are left with who do want to die and are determined to die is to shop amongst the 23% who will do it. And so we're left in a situation where those doctors who are willing are the ones who will do it, and those are the people to whom anyone who's determined to commit suicide must go. These laws are flawed in so many ways, and you're, is it an MP in Canada, yeah?
Yeah, a member of
Parliament. Canada makes the same mistake that, for example, Brittany Maynard's family made in response to criticisms over her death. It's the same mistake that the laws make in this country, because what they say is, here's an individual who is determined that their life is no longer worth living. We will create a law which will allow them to die, but what they fail to notice is that laws cover every citizen of the country. Mm-hmm. So what that means is that as soon as the law is passed, people for whom the law was never supposed to be intended come along and say, right, I want to claim my rights under this law. So now we have a situation where in Belgium, for example, their euthanasia law has been extended. Last year it was extended to children of any age. Children who cannot marry, cannot vote, cannot drink alcohol, cannot do a whole range of things that are restricted to adults, but they can ask to die. And at the beginning of this year, they had agreed to euthanize a prisoner who was convicted of multiple rape and murder. They pulled back from that, but I think that was due to political pressure and media pressure more than anything else. But the simple truth is that once the law is on the statute books, that's it. It's not for individuals. It's not for people who find themselves in terrible, terrible, desperate circumstances. And even then, I think there are questions to be asked about those people and the fears that they have. We know full well that when people are at their most vulnerable, after surgery or at the point of diagnosis of a terminal disease or some dreadful situation, they then feel that they want to die. But given the right care and given the right support, they most often change their minds. So it's really, the law is never going to be fit for purpose. And the Falconer Bill also includes people with progressive illness. Mm-hmm. So what that means is virtually every disabled person that I know can be classed as having progressive condition will qualify under this bill immediately. So we know full well that these are great threats, particularly to disabled people.
Do you have any ideas or thoughts on how we can better communicate with and increase the participation of people with disabilities in our movement?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we're up against the age-old problem that we face. The lobby that wants to change the law to permit people to die in this way has a very simple case to present to the media. They just go for the hardest of all cases, the most dreadful cases, present them to the public for sympathy, for pity, and create a wave of public sympathy which says, yeah, regardless, we're not going to inform ourselves about any of the deeper issues. We just see this person and we say of ourselves, we wouldn't like to be like them. Mm-hmm. Disabled people, unfortunately, particularly as we've talked about in terms of the austerity measures, are really struggling. They have no resources. We often face issues about energy, about transportation, all of the difficulties that we face in our environment getting out there. And one of the things that has been really useful for us, even though I really detest social media, they have been, I cannot deny, they've been really, really effective and efficient at pulling together disabled people from all over the country and far and beyond to contribute to a discussion amongst ourselves in particular And it's very useful to have that discussion between ourselves where we test out thoughts, ideas. It's a safe space, but it allows us also to advertise and to call on others when we can to come and protest or come and join in with opposition. So we were able to bring those groups of people to the House of Lords in July and again in January. I think it's a bit more difficult. There's currently a bill going through the Scottish Parliament. It's a bit more difficult to get people up to Scotland. But yeah, I mean, in that context, I think our best bet at the moment is to tap into social media. One of the difficulties is that there are so many new ones coming on stream all the time, that people use different ones, and it's very difficult to get everybody to learn to use the same thing at the same time. However, I think Facebook and Twitter have been used to great effect in this regard.
So let's see. Do you have any other thoughts you wanted to share with us at the moment?
Yeah, that my battery's about to die. So if I disappear off, please forgive me. I don't mean to, but I think it's really important. There's something going on in Holland at the minute which is deeply worrying. They have begun, what they did in 2010 in Holland was they stopped counting any euthanasia death which was not a direct result of a long, persistent and determined request by the patient. So what that means is they've not counted involuntary and non-voluntary euthanasia deaths as euthanasia. They have what's known as the Groningen Protocol, which allows for the euthanasia of neonates, newly born babies with disabilities. And in fact, we have evidence now that children are not being born with spina bifida in one part of Holland because they're being aborted before they come to term, simply because they've got back to spina bifida, which, as my friend Connie Gray Thompson, who's an 11 times Paralympic athlete, would say, means that she wouldn't exist. Mm-hmm. And so there's a very real worry, however, that what they're doing in Holland now is they're using palliative sedation to actually become terminal sedation, and the rise in the use of terminal sedation in Holland is extremely concerning, especially now that the French seem to be following suit and thinking that this is a good option for them, rather than going, as they see it in government, for full-blown euthanasia law or an assisted suicide law. They think it's easier to legislate for terminal sedation, and it's extremely worrying because it's just euthanasia by the back door. We need to do something to fight back about at that level, and in fact there is a new group just started up, Soulager mais pas tuer, in France, to try to combat just that program, if you will, which will come about if people are allowed to use sedation to terminate people's lives.
Right, right, and in the sense that that battle was fought in the U.S. in the 1980s with the cases of McAfee, what's his first name? I can't remember, I'm sorry. And Rivlin, David Rivlin, and several others, quads who were stuck in institutions, wanted to get out. Larry McAfee, that's his name. Wanted to get out of institutions and couldn't because independent living services, either they didn't know about them or they were isolated from them. So, for example, Larry McAfee, after he brought his case to the Supreme Court.
You have an incoming call from Kevin Fitzpatrick.
Okay. Okay. He won his Supreme Court battle to he froze to get his right to die with palliative sedation, but the problem was that he by the time he had won his battle, he had also been reached by independent living folks from the local independent living center. He had his own apartment. He got personal care attendants in his apartment, and he decided he didn't want to die anymore. but in other cases in the 1980s, the courts basically said that life with a disability is so awful, people with disabilities should be able to have the right to refuse treatment. And so that battle is essentially lost, which makes it much harder to fight the battles over palliative sedation.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. We was happy to have you as our guest. So see you soon. We will.
I'm gonna go on and do a couple of news briefs.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But I just say bye to Kevin.
Yeah.
We will talk to you later, and maybe we will have you as a guest another time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've got a couple of news briefs. One is that Quebec's Suicide Prevention Week is coming up. The Suicide Prevention Awareness Week will take place February 1st to 7th in Quebec. And it's important to remember that a major risk indicator for suicide is developing a disability or the diagnosis of a serious illness. So people who study and work in the suicide prevention field understand that these are major risks for a person who might, if you're evaluating somebody's risk for suicide, those are major indicators. But it's a little bizarre because the people who promote assisted suicide say, no, 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 people aren't suicidal who are asking for assisted suicide. So it's a little screwy. Our message during Suicide Prevention Week is, why do non-disabled people who express a desire to die receive suicide prevention services, while people with disabilities who say the same thing get help to kill themselves? And keep in mind the recent suicides by people with disabilities in Quebec have been related to failure to provide adequate treatment and services, and that's Yvonne Tremblay, Pierre Mayence, and more recently, one I'm going to mention now, which is that this month we heard about 2 people with disabilities who committed suicide because they did not receive necessary mental health services. On January 13th, the Journal de Montréal reported on the coroner's findings that a lack of therapy caused the suicide of Diane Côté 2 years ago. According to the coroner's report, la Société d'assurance automobile du Québec, SAAQ, refused to pay Ms. Côté's psychotherapy. Ms. Côté had chronic pain and PTSD as a result of a car accident, and after that refusal to pay for her therapy and losing the fight with the SAAQ, she committed suicide. In a similar case, a coroner in England determined that the suicide of Deborah Milliken, who had multiple sclerosis, was directly linked to the local hospital's refusal to treat her. Ms. Milliken was brought to the hospital by 2 friends, saying that she wanted to kill herself and that she had a plan to do so. However, the mental health worker who said that there were no beds and the hospital couldn't help her, so they sent her home, and she killed herself 2 days later. And as I said, in those 2 cases, the coroner found that the lack of service was the direct link to the person's death. And this is what happens when people with disabilities don't get suicide prevention treatment when they ask for it. And our last news brief is about Holocaust Remembrance Day, which was the 27th of January. This week we remembered the 70th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz death camp, and by association, the entire Holocaust. In their scheme, the Nazis wanted to eliminate undesirable elements, as they put it, from the human race. In their view, that included Jews, the Roma, gays, and people with physical and intellectual disabilities. And the program to eliminate people with disabilities was called T4, after the address of the program's headquarters at 4 Tiergartenstrasse in Berlin. In this context, it's disturbing that there are so many countries that are in the process of implementing euthanasia programs where people with disabilities are the primary eligible group. So
that's sad.
Yeah.
We had fought a big war against one of these things, and we doesn't remember what happened. And recently we have other case of genocide. Rwanda, we have Eritrea, and many more, okay? And we doesn't remember. By putting those laws forward, are the country that we are in just doing a bad thing, and we will do a very harsh thing against humanity.
Yeah, exactly. So, in order to contact us about what we've talked about today or for any information, you can reach us on Twitter using the @TVNDY. You can reach us on Facebook at facebook.com/toujours vivant not dead yet. You can go to our website at tvndy.ca or send an email to info@tv-ndy.ca. If you want to do a search on euthanasia and disability and click the videos tab on Google, you'll find our videos from since September of 2013 that we've done every week on different parts of different themes related to euthanasia and assisted suicide. There are lots of videos, so please feel free to browse English and French videos. And please thank you to Christian Debray for joining us, and thanks also to Kevin Fitzpatrick. Please join us again. Thank you for being there. Join us again next week. Take care. Goodbye.